anyone not ready? All right, then I'll start now. We affirm resolve. Contention 1 is grounds for discrimination. In the status quo or in the con world, student searches are justified by reasonable suspicion. This reasonable suspicion is merely a hunch and is entrenched in racism. There are two ways in which reasonable suspicion creates mechanisms for discrimination. First, according to Slavokin from UCLA in 1991, reasonable suspicion is often based on officers or school officials' previous experiences and experience with previous crimes under similar circumstances. This means that the officials inevitably act on stereotypes derived from their personal experiences steeped in racist beliefs. Second, because race is legally a factor in reasonableness. Kevin Johnson of the Georgetown Law Journal writes in 2010 that under the Supreme Court case Brignoni-Pones versus the United States, the U.S. government asserted that race was legally permissible as a factor in determining reasonable suspicion. In fact, Nance 2013 from the University of Florida Levin College of Law quantifies that the odds for arbitrary searches in schools with larger minority populations were 7.7 times greater than in schools with small minority populations. Minority students are more often subject to intrusive searches without apparent justification. There are two main impacts of this disproportionate racism. The first impact is entrenching the cycle of violence. Bryant of the Journal of Black Studies furthers in 2011 that internalized racism has the largest effect on a youth's inclination towards aggressive and violent behavior, even more so than factors like a delinquent friend group, impulsive behavior, and drug use. This colors the perception of students' views on minorities since they spend the majority of their time in school. The second impact is perpetuating the school-to-prison pipeline. Wilf of the Center for American Progress corroborates in 2012 that African American students are 3.5 times more likely to be suspended, and those expelled or suspended were 2.85 times more likely to be in contact with the juvenile justice system within the following year. This school-to-prison pipeline has huge implications. Doyle from the University of Chicago finds in 2013 that those incarcerated as a juvenile are 41 percentage points more likely to have entered adult prison. This causes an intergenerational cycle of disempowerment. Conway 2015 from the CCSU explains that children with incarcerated parents are 3 times more likely to be arrested, convicted, or incarcerated in the future. Contention 2 is the educational environment. Implementing the probable cause standard improves trust between student and educators. Nance writes in the University of Florida College of Law in 2013 that in generalized school searches, every student stands accused and has become a suspect, which is especially detrimental given the special relationship of trust which supposedly exists between student and teacher. It has led students to feel constantly watched, causing them to distrust authority figures. Foreman of the University of Detroit furthers in 2015 that children who are subjected to school searches develop negative views of schools and distrust of law enforcement that alienates them from mainstream society, increasing the lure of counterculture ideas such as gangs. The impact is mitigating violence in 2 ways. First, through decreasing criminalization. Baker 2003 of Georgia State University writes that intrusive security measures which produce alienation and mistrust among students increase rather than inhibit student misbehavior. Johnson 2015 quantifies this effect. Comparing a stopped juvenile to a juvenile with no police contact, the researchers found that the stopped juvenile is less likely to experience guilt for committing delinquent behavior, concluding that adolescents involved in searches under reasonable suspicion are 4 times more likely to engage in delinquent behavior. Second, through teacher-student interactions. Michael Solowski of the University of Arizona explains people's willingness to report threats of violence increases when they feel connected to the campus community, have confidence in administrators, and trust campus police officers. On the other hand, if students on the campus community don't feel connected, they won't work to protect each other's safety and well-being. And it's for these reasons that we affirm today's resolution.
Okay. Is everyone ready? Yeah. You guys ready? Yeah. Sweet. Austin Renegade resolved in United States public K-12 schools the probable cause standard ought to apply to searches of students. Contention 1 is safety first. In 1990, criminologist Travis Hershey developed the general theory of crime. It posits that the root cause of crime amongst all youth is a lack of self-control that develops through poor child-rearing methods that refrain from monitoring or pushing adolescent behavior to teach responsibility. Therefore, the best way to reduce crime is to focus on steering students who lack self-control away from it. Deterrence-based prevention strategies are the most effective way to do this because a report by Oxford University explains the situational action theory, which contends that people commit crimes if they see it as a viable alternative to lawful behavior. In other words, people are more likely to commit a crime in a setting with few rules and even fewer ways to enforce them. Importantly, criminologists find that the situational action theory is most applicable to individuals with weak self-control and a high propensity to commit crime. They confirm empirically in a meta-analysis that the effect of deterrence is greatest for adolescents with low self-control. A report by St. Louis University continues that it is necessary to apply the reasonable suspicion standard to deter students. If students know that they can be searched with only reasonable suspicion, they will be less likely to carry contraband. Conversely, a higher standard of proof would tempt students to bring contraband to school because they would have a reduced chance of being caught. The effect of deterrence through heavier security measures is proven empirically. The New York Post confirms in 2015 that when school districts in Chicago shifted away from strict security measures, teacher unions described the classroom as lawless. Indeed, 65% of teachers reported that the school had become substantially less safe when trust-based approaches to discipline were prioritized over traditional safety measures. Greg Chen of the City University of New York finds that higher school security is associated with lower levels of school violence. The New York Post impacts that this increase in violence resulting from lowered security measures puts staff members at risk, making teaching difficult and quality instruction impossible. A report by Public Agenda expounds that more than 1 in 3 teachers said colleagues in their school had left because student discipline was such a challenge. This is crucial because the National Bureau of Economic Research finds that teacher turnover has a significant and negative effect on student achievement, and the RAND Corporation concludes that teachers matter more to student achievement than any other aspect of schooling. Contention 2 is Vape Nation. Reuters reports in 2016 that court cases like Veronia v. Acton and Todd v. Rush County have upheld the right for schools to implement mandatory random drug testing, while the NCBI writes that these universal or routine drug tests obviously fail to satisfy the probable cause requirement of the Fourth Amendment. The Cornell Law Journal explains that the court has upheld warrantless searches by authorities in public schools like drug testing by dispensing probable cause requirements in favor of a reasonableness standard. This means that a switch to the probable cause standard eliminates drug testing from schools. This is problematic because according to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, the primary purpose of drug testing is not to punish students who use drugs, but to prevent drug abuse and to help students already using become drug-free. The Partnership for Drug-Free Kids corroborates that federal guidelines for drug testing discourage schools from expelling or suspending students if they fail drug tests and encourage real treatment options. The Drug Free America Foundation concludes that students who fail drug tests are not turned over to law enforcement, but sent to counseling or therapy. Because it sends kids to treatment, drug testing reduces drug use. By weaning offenders away from drug use over time and educating students about the dangers of drug activity, a report by United Way finds that drug treatment reduces drug use by 40 to 60%. There are 2 impacts. The first is crime. According to the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, 80% of the prison population in the U.S. were committed on substance abuse charges. Because drugs are evil and therapy purges them, the Mental Health Services Administration reports that a $1 investment in drug therapy yields up to a $10 savings in health and juvenile justice costs and lost productivity. The second of which is cannabis kills. Destinations and Recovery explains that substance abuse in teens results in dangerous changes to brain chemistry and decision making. In fact, drug abuse is one of the key risk factors for depression and suicide in adolescents. The International Business Times quantifies that teenagers who use cannabis frequently are 60% less likely to finish high school and 7 times more likely to commit suicide. Drugs are bad, negate.
Alright. So your second contention has us believe that it's better to send kids to like therapy than it is to punish them, right?
Well, like, sort of. The argument we make is that, like, just specifically in terms of drug testing in schools doesn't send kids to, like, jail.
Wait, but your first contention indicates that it would be better if we sent them to jail, and it'd be better if we enforced these
No, absolutely
right?
not. Absolutely not. That's in terms of searches, right? We're telling you that, like, a drug test is
Wait, no,
different
your
than, like,
entire
a
first
conventional
contention
search
just
by
basically
SRO.
says that when we don't enforce security policies, when we don't punish kids, and when we treat them with
No,
trust-based approaches,
no, that's
then
not
it's
all.
bad.
That's not all the argument we're making, right? The argument we're making is that it's better to deter kids so that they don't like start using drugs, right? If they do, it's better that we have a way to identify who's using drugs and then have a way to like fix the problem.
So would you
Wait,
call
can I
it-
ask you a question though?
Sure.
Okay. So let's talk about your first contention. Where is your like solvency? Like where does the problem get better? Why does it get
Because
better?
probable cause, under reasonable suspicion right now, Literally, race is like a fact. Like you can use race as a factor in determining whether or not someone is suspicious.
Okay,
under probable cause, that changes.
Do you read any evidence that says it changes under probable cause? Because I didn't hear any from your case.
I mean, like that's implicit inside of the evidence that we cite that tells you that it's under reasonable suspicion.
What
and under probable cause, okay.
Like, where is it implicit? I didn't hear it in your case.
It was in the it was in the UCLA evidence.
Okay, and then just one more thing. Is stop and frisk reasonable suspicion?
Depends.
Okay. Okay, can I ask you one more question though?
Go ahead.
Okay, so let's talk about the educational environment.
Yes.
You talk about trust a lot.
I do.
Are there other factors in that compose trust between students and teachers besides the search standard that's used in schools?
Yeah, definitely. But the search standard is like the first step in promoting that mistrust.
Why?
Because under generalized searches that go away under probable cause, everyone becomes a suspect, and everyone is induced in this environment and this culture.
I don't understand why that comes first when it comes to trust, right?
I'm telling you,
that doesn't really,
our evidence indicates that when students are searched under generalized searches, which apply to a very large part of the student populace, that's when we start experiencing these bad effects.
Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Okay. So what is your first contention advocating for? If it's not advocating to send kids to jail or to punish them for
It's not either of those things. It's just saying that deterrence is really, really important in schools. Probable
so
cause.
you're going off of deterrence.
Yeah, that's our first contention.
Okay. So just to clarify, in order for you to access your offense, you have to show that deterrence happens, right?
Well, I guess so. Yeah, that's our first contention.
Cool.
We're telling you that through the general theory of crime and then the situational
General
action
theory of crime.
Yeah, low self-control, right? That's
are any of those are any of those studies specific to crime inside of school or just crime?
It's about crime in adolescence, and adolescents spend the vast majority of their time in school. So yeah, that's fine.
I'll get a minute.
That was 1 minute.
Is everyone ready? Okay. Starting with my opponent's first contention, they portray crime as if it's out of control, and that self-control, or the lack of it, is causing students to turn towards criminal actions. But the reality portrays a very different narrative. Look to Weissman, who tells you that from 1974 to 2006, suspensions more than doubled, while during the same time period, crime rates actually fell during schools. This illustrates that the problem is in the punitive measures of the security measures which they're advocating for. Not that crime is actually increasing, as they would like to claim. The security measures are implementing too harsh of consequences for these students, thus funneling through the school to prison pipeline. Now let's talk about their Oxford card, which talks about how people commit crimes is seen as an alternative to lawful behavior. They portray this as a zero-sum game in that if you don't obey the law, you're automatically going to commit crime. That's an incredibly broad simplification of how the world actually works. Don't buy this evidence until they can actually illustrate exactly what is going on here. Next, on your New York Times card, how they mention how deterrence is an effective measure for students who lack self-control. What they felt their impacts tied specifically to security measures, not necessarily an evidentiary standard. Thus, you can de-link their impact right there. Moreover, we demonstrate that through increased searches in school environments, we increase suspicion and mistrust among teachers and students, and that has a direct impact upon criminalization. Remember Bryant, who tells you that internalized racism has the largest impact upon a youth's inclination towards violent behavior that ties directly into all their impacts about criminalization. Next, regarding the card from the New York Post about how teachers' unions describe schools as being significantly less safe, this is incredibly vague. What exactly does this less safe description mean? We have no way to evaluate this impact. Furthermore, the study only examines schools in New York, which we can't apply the results of such a small sample size to national consequences, national ramifications. Now on to their second contention about drug usage. There are several problems with drug tests which they advocate for. First, current 2016 from the Drug Policy Alliance describes that the cost of drug testing often exceeds the total a school district spends on existing drug education, prevention, and counseling programs, which are actually much more efficacious at preventing drug usage to begin with. In fact, drug testing takes very scarce resources needed by students who are actually misusing drugs. Furthermore, as the November 25th from the Washington Post describes, drug testing actually is to transition to even more synthetic, harder drugs. Since the synthetic drugs are unlikely to show up in standardized drug tests, so the drug's popularity has been particularly pronounced among individuals who are subject to these drug tests. And in fact, Yamaguchi of the University of Michigan quantifies exactly what this impact is. He talks about how marijuana prevalence was 4.7 percentage points lower in the schools with random drug testing, but the use of other illicit drugs was 3.3 percentage points higher. Moreover, drug testing is ineffective. It simply doesn't work in deterring students from using these drugs. A 2003 study founded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, which was the largest of its kind, found that there is no difference between levels of drug use at schools that test their students and those that do not. The study concluded that student drug testing was not associated with either the prevalence or frequency of student marijuana use or of other illicit drug use. At this point, you can delete every one of their impacts. Well, let's examine some of your more specific parts. They first mentioned how in prisons, 80% of people incarcerated are there for drug abuse. This illustrates precisely the problem of these harsh security measures, which are only being exacerbated under the status quo. It's not that drug usage is actually worsening or increasing in recent times, but that these punitive measures are becoming more harsh. They're only entrenching the cycle of incarceration and disempowerment. Next, when they talk about how drug therapy is actually beneficial to help deter students, this is different from what they advocate for in terms of drug testing. Drug therapy is precisely the means of deterrence we should be aiming for, and that's allowable by affirming the resolution. So for all these reasons, we urge a negative balance. I mean, an affirmative balance.
Lives are the standard for the round because you can't get a life back. Legally get a life back for two ways. First, the cannabis suicides we talk about. Whenever you smoke weed on the daily, you're 7 times more likely to kill yourself. But more than that, moreover, Professor John Henry finds that because cannabis messes up your lungs and you get lung cancer, that marijuana kills 30,000 people every single year. That's the biggest link in the lives. Thus, the drug testing argument is really important. But then, quick clarification on our first contention, right? They keep trying to pin us into this whole saying that we're advocating for these really strict punishments, right? We're not advocating for beheadings. What we're saying our link into deterrence is just it's the increased likelihood of getting caught, not the actual punishment, right? That's our link. It's not about increased punitive measures, because that's not what we're debating about. So, let's go on to their first contention about racism. There's a few problems with this. First, their first warrant is literally saying that police are always racist because they base it on previous experience, right? That's never unique to reasonable suspicion. If anything, that's a reason it doesn't change when you switch to probable cause, right? Once you switch to this standard, police aren't going to all seem act differently, right? There's no uniqueness to that. So on their second warrant, this is also problematic, right? Because the court case they cite just says that they can use race as a factor in reasonable suspicion. It never says they can't do that for probable cause, right? So they need to prove that would necessarily be eliminated in probable cause for them to get any unique offense off of this second warrant, right? So then, really importantly, if you look empirically, comparing reasonable suspicion to probable cause, you actually don't see a decrease in the amount of racist searches. This is proven by the New York Times and the New York Police Department, who find that in New York City, they compared the rates of stop and frisk, which they say are the same as reasonable suspicion in their Johnson study, and they compared that to the amount of arrests, which are done under probable cause. And they found that in both cases, 83% of the people stopped or arrested were minorities. That's really important because it means there's literally no difference in the amount of racist searches. But then, even if you don't buy that, we're going to solve back for the racism impact best by increasing the amount of education through promoting safety and reducing drug use. This is really important. And promoting education is the biggest link into racism because according to the UN, whenever you increase education, you're going to see a reduction in racist and xenophobic policies because the voting base becomes more educated and tolerant. And then, onto their impacts. First, we're going to say deterrence is the root cause of violence, not racism, right? Because maybe I'm racist, or maybe I have internalized racism, but I only act on that if I have the low self-control. That's why the general theory of crime is going to outweigh, because ultimately people are going to act on that if you have deterrence. But then, on the school-to-prison pipeline, we link into it better, because remember the evidence at the bottom of our case saying 80% of inmates are there for substance abuse. That's a bigger link in the school-to-prison pipeline. So, on their second condition about the educational environment, there's a few problems with this. First of all, I don't really know why there's going to be a decrease in trust, right? But if I go to a baseball game and they search my bag before I go in, that's not going to make me want to commit a crime at the baseball game, right? I recognize that that's a reason that they're I'm feeling protected because they're trying to keep me safe. I think that's a good thing. It's not going to reduce trust. But then all their evidence Nance, it's about general security and not individual searches or the search standards, so it's not really applicable. But second, trust in schools is already really high. In fact, according to the International Journal of Research Studies on Education, only 0.3% of students don't trust their schools, right? They didn't prove why that 0.3% increase in trust is going to mean anything. But second, they're not going to get a 0.3% increase in trust because James McCroskey writes that there's so many factors that go into trust. For example, how much money your school gets, how overcrowded it is, or to your home life, which is really important because he finds that teacher assertiveness and discipline only accounts for 7% of everything that goes into like a student's trust of school, so they're not really going to solve back for this. So then, on to their two impacts. Their first is like criminalization. Then they talk about the Johnson evidence so that you're 4 times more likely to commit a crime. So first of all, this evidence is subject to selection bias, right? Because if I'm a student who got searched, I was more likely to commit a crime in the first place, right? I got searched for a reason. At that point, it's not like an actually unique increase in crime because of the reasonable suspicion standard. But then deterrence is going to ultimately outweigh the trust argument for 4 reasons. Because first, James McCroskey explains that fostering trust in relationships takes a lot of time, right? Because you have to continuously be building it, and it takes a lot of attention. Whereas deterrence works immediately, and that's going to be good because you should stop crime as fast as possible. But second, deterrence solves the root cause of all of the crime. Because remember the general theory of crime, the situational action theory, which says that deterrence works best specifically on the kids who had a high propensity to commit crimes in the first place. So you're solving the root of the problem. But second, deterrence is deterrence is a prerequisite to trust, right? Because you can have safety without any trust, right? But ultimately, you can't have trust without safety because students don't feel safe and they don't feel like they're being looked out for. That's ultimately what's going to cause the increase in mistrust and then thus more crime. For those reasons, we've regained.
That's 35 seconds.
Yeah, I'm ready for throw.
Do you mind if I have the first question?
Go ahead.
So you talk about the benefits of deterrence. Is there a limit to how much deterrence schools should implement in their environments?
I think the status quo is pretty good. I mean, the justification of the TLO decision was that there's a balance between students' privacy and like the security of schools. So like I would say like a change in standard is like a step in the wrong direction. I don't think we have like maybe like there's some like policies that like aren't good, but I would say the reasonable suspicion like has its place and does deter students.
Okay, but safety operates on a sliding scale, correct? Like you wouldn't advocate for every student who steps onto a school
I wouldn't advocate for like
a strip search.
I wouldn't advocate for like strip searches, like beheadings or anything like that. But I also don't think we should have like no discipline in schools and just have like this like kumbaya sort of thing.
Well, by raising that evidentiary standard, I don't think you're completely removing discipline at all. You're simply eliminating the most unnecessary discriminatory searches, which do nothing for the safety of the environment.
Okay, so I have a question about some of the studies you read on in response for second detention. So you read like the 2003 National Institute for Drug Abuse, and then you read Yamaguchi. Is Yamaguchi the author of the National Institute for Drug Abuse study? Because I'm like 90% sure, but I was just like wondering, because like.
I'm not sure on that.
Okay, you can just like show me that after cross, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so then I have another question. So like, you say that like it's not a zero-sum game, and like students could like not be following the law, but also not committing a crime, like in response to our case. But like, isn't the definition of committing a crime not following the law?
Your evidence says that people commit crimes and see it as an alternative to lawful behavior. So like, that is a very sweeping generalization. Like, I don't see how that relates back to deterrence exactly.
Like all the situational action theory is saying is that like I commit a crime if I see it as like a viable, right? Like I'm not going to commit a crime if I think that like it's just like you know, if you only commit a crime if you think you can actually like get away with it or like it's actually worth it, right? And they find that like that would affect is particularly for the students who have the highest propensity to commit crimes in the first place and the low self-control, right? But like you say it's like too generalized, but like I'm like confused on what you're arguing there, like just isn't like breaking the law literally the definition of a crime, like.
Well, what we're saying is that the current search methods in place are too unnecessary and aren't actually effective in imposing deterrence to unlawful behavior. But let's move on to your stop and frisk card. So are arrests the same thing as searches?
Like they're under the same standard, so like I would say that like it's like.
No, they're entirely different.
Like how so? Like wouldn't. What's like the difference? Because the standard's the same.
The
standard for the two is the same, right?
An arrest isn't necessarily predicated upon a search to like begin with. Like you can arrest
I know they're not searches, right? But we're talking about the standard of proof, right? So if supposedly you need more evidence to arrest somebody than you do to stop and frisk, how come there's like the exact same amount of people getting like minorities getting arrested that are getting stop and frisk?
No, the evidentiary standards for like arrest and like stop and frisk, those are two very different things.
But it's just reasonable suspicion and probable cause.
Probably just framework and then issues. Is anyone not ready?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. We'll agree agree to their lives forever, but will assert that safety is more important because safety is what leads to things like the loss of lives or the degradation of lives through funneling them into the school to prison pipeline. With that in mind, let's get onto the argument between deterrence versus trust. Our opponents try telling you that deterrence is the primary thing that deters people, that keeps people away from crime, but this portrays a fundamental misunderstanding of how kids work. Our opponents make the assumption that kids want to commit crimes. The only reason that they're not is because they're being deterred from doing so because of these searches, but that's not how it works. We tell you that we decrease the intent to commit the crime in the first place. The reason why kids are delinquent in the first place is because of mistrust against their schools. The reason why they resort to these measures is because of things like internalized racism, like we mentioned in our card. And that's where we're solving for the root cause, because we're stopping their propensity to commit crime in the first place. This is why you all of our offense automatically outweighs theirs in concerns to deterrence. And on top of that, we are able to quantify the effects. For example, the Johnson evidence, which indicates that after your search, you're 4 times more likely to be delinquent. My opponents try indicting this by telling you that this is reverse causation, but because Johnson controls for this in his study, he explicitly says that he controls for this. Then on to the next issue, that's drugs. This is clear offense for our side as well, because first, the Noble card, which tells you that synthetic drugs are used in place of regular drugs like marijuana and alcohol, because these synthetic drugs are the ones that pass these tests, and that's why Yamaguchi finds that under drug testing environments, there's a 3.3% increase in the amount of harder drugs used. We're impacting the lives on a wider scale than they are. But finally, the current evidence, which says that even if these drug tests are effective, they're taking away money from more effective programs like drug education. That's how we're stopping the root cause in the first place. We're preventing them from taking the first step into using these drugs, not just stopping the kids who are already using these drugs. We're the ones leading back into the root cause. We're the ones leading into lives. This is direct offense for our side. The second voter is going to be on the environment. My opponents try telling you that this environment is going to stay the exact same and that searches aren't really a big deal, but they completely misunderstand what the Foreman evidence tells you, which tells you that when we have these generalized searches, we create an entire culture, an environment of mistrust. That's the reason why the Johnson card concludes that there's a 4 times increase in the amount of delinquency, and that's the reason why trust is going away, why kids are more willing to commit crimes, and why kids are more likely to act on internalized racism.
Okay, so I'm just gonna go brief overview extension, then deterrence versus trust, and then drug testing. Is everybody ready? Yeah? Okay, so extend the overview talking about how lives are going to be the most important. Remember, the chronic marijuana usage leads to a 7 times increase in suicide, and then lung cancer leads to 30,000 deaths a year. So chronic marijuana usage is going to be the biggest impact. So let's go to deterrence v. trust. First of all, they give no real-world contextualization or example of trust-based approaches working. We give you New York Post from our case, which tells you in Chicago, when schools switched to trust, 65% of more teachers said the classroom was lawless and there was a lot more crime. That right there is proof that switching away from trust is really bad for schools because that increases crime, right? Now, let's go on and extend some defense on the trust argument. First of all, you can extend the Nance evidence, which says that general security increases trust as well, and then you can also extend the fact that this assertiveness by administrators only makes up 7% of total trust, so they're only solving for 7%. They have almost no impact here. Now let's go on to what really matters, which is going to be drug testing. First of all, they say drug tests are going to increase the cost and there's too many resources, but that's not true because logically these drug tests identify who to put into these rehabilitation programs instead of just spending throwing money at the problem of drugs in schools and hoping it does something. You can focus down and find the actual kids who are using. But then he says drug testing just leads to worse drugs, and both of these pieces of evidence are from Yamaguchi. But in 2004, 1 year later, Yamaguchi released another paper, and he says all the findings that he has are actually not causal, and it's mostly just his sample size is bad, and most of his results aren't causal. So that means don't buy that either. Then they say that it's just going to lead to more harder drugs later. But the kids don't know what's on these drug tests, right? They change it every time. Finding the kids is going to be the most important impact here. They're not responding to the nuances of our argument. It's not about deterring kids from using drugs. It's about identifying the problem of drug use in kids. You can't have drug education unless you know who's using drugs. They can see the link that drug testing goes away with probable cause in their rebuttal. You can extend that across the flow as well. Then remember our impact. We tell you that 80% of the prison population is because of drug possession charges, right? We solve for this long term. This feeds into all criminalization and school to prison pipeline impacts. Then you remember suicides. That goes way up whenever you have more chronic marijuana usage. Vote chronic.
So when you talk about drug tests not being costly, Is this your own analysis, or do you have a warrant for this?
Our argument isn't that drug tests aren't like costly. What we're saying is that they're worth the cost on balance, right? Because like you're saying that the drug testing like money could have been spent on like drug education programs. The problem with that is I would say it's a lot more efficient to drug test the students and then put only the ones using drugs in the drug education programs than it is to just have blanket drug education programs.
Basically,
for every single
like it's a
student.
lot more efficient instead of just throwing money at the problem of drugs in school to like nuance the way that you spend the money that actually like is effective,
Oh my
right?
God.
The worst thing is
throwing money
education
at-
problems
yeah.
actually get to the root cause of the matter and counseling students, helping them to understand
Yeah, so
exactly why
Well,
drugs
it's like
Our
tobacco.
argument-
and furthermore,
So like
current
we're
drug
looking at
testing
drug
like
education
devices are
better.
actually ineffective, as shown by the National Institute of Drug Abuse, which is an entirely different study from that of
No,
Yamaguchi's.
it is Yamaguchi, right? The reason I know this is because the National Institute for Drug Abuse study, it's the sample size of like 94,000 students, and that's the same as Yamaguchi. And it said in your card it's like done by 3 University of Michigan researchers, and Yamaguchi's like the
I'm
guy
trying
from
to find the
University of Michigan.
indicted in here. Like, where does it say anything? It just says that
It
it's
raises questions about the causality of the report, right?
raises
Everyone-
questions. Is that the same thing as saying there's no causation?
Yeah, and
I mean,
which report
it
is
at
it
least
talking
puts like a
about?
significant amount of doubt on
Okay, but we
Yamaguchi's
give like another
causal
warrant to
findings.
provide that causation. Like when kids don't want to be detected inside of these drug tests, they switch over to the synthetic
Yeah, so-
drugs which aren't
So
detected.
like, we responded that by saying that like kids don't
We
like
don't
know
respond to that.
kids don't know what's on a drug test, right? They don't say, oh, this is a drug test for like X, Y, and Z.
But like these synthetic
it's just
drugs,
an
like
overall-
that doesn't matter because these synthetic drugs are like engineered to bypass those drug tests.
You never said it was like specific to synthetic drugs.
Also,
You
yeah,
know,
I'd like
it's
to
just
ask
like
you-
other
That's
drugs.
why we should
wait,
detect these
wait.
commonly used drugs like
Okay, so
marijuana.
wait, about synthetic drugs, right?
Yes.
So like, how much more are kids using synthetic drugs because of drug tests?
Okay, 3.3%.
But that doesn't- that
Is that,
doesn't say
wait, is
synthetic
that,
drugs.
is that 100% causal because of drug tests?
That's what we're arguing.
Well, wait, is that what the evidence argues? Is that,
I
or
mean,
is
the
that what
evidence
you want?
says in schools where drug testing has been implemented, there is a 3.3% increase. You can draw the causal link there, or we can draw it for you.
Like the study makes the analysis that the drug's popularity has increased because students know they're unlikely to show up in these drug tests.
Okay, you guys can ask us a question.
Great. What's more effective at deterring drug usage? Like stopping drug users who are already abusing drugs and like more likely to turn to these drugs later on in their life, or stopping it at the root and like having education programs which tell kids not to go into drugs into like the first place.
Here's the important thing, right? We're controlling the internal link into these education programs because the way they get put into the education programs is if they test positive on a drug
Wait,
test,
shouldn't we,
right?
shouldn't
I'm
we
not
have
gonna-
let everyone have access to like, these education programs which talk about the harms of
I'd say-
drugs?
I'd say-
Like, why do we have to wait for them to like smoke weed before we start like educating them?
Right, like you should, okay, so like the important thing is, right, like one, like schools aren't having blanket drug education programs in the status quo.
Yeah, and that's because we're spending all the money on drug testing.
That's not necessarily true, right?
Like, that's like
You don't
literally what
prove-
our evidence says. Like
you
we
don't
funnel
prove that-
money away from other more effective drug programs like drug
doesn't
education
prove
to
that there's,
fund
like-
these drug tests.
It doesn't prove that if you stop spending money on the drug testing, it would all of a sudden
Like,
all
it
funnel
says that
back
this
into
fund-
those
these funds were
education programs.
diverted.
But
First turns in their case, drugs is the primary way through which they link to the most important impact on their lives, which they state is rounds. But there's several problems with this, which Peter tells you. First, the National Institute of Drug Abuse found that these drug testing methods are highly ineffective. They try to indict the study, they claim that Yamaguchi was involved. This is a separate study from the one which was indicted, and moreover, they didn't perform a proper indictment. What the report actually says, there's simply questions raised over some of like the methods of the study. That's not a full like reverse causality application to this study. Moreover, drug testing programs divert funds for more effective counseling programs, which actually get to the root cause of the matter and educating students about why drugs are harmful and not to use them. By only questioning these existing drug testing methods, you're not only like creating like suspicion in environment and distrust in the environment, but also diverting funds from like more productive uses. So that takes out all their entire impacts related to drugs. Next, on deterrence, they entirely drop this point in their summary. And moreover, understand that deterrence acts upon a sliding scale. They never prove to you that eliminating like these most necessary searches from the resolution is going to cause such a massive shift in safety that like students are suddenly going to be let loose and have no disciplinary restraint on them. By affirming the resolution, we're eliminating the root cause which drives students to commit these infractions in the first place, namely mistrust and alienation from the environment. As Foreman tells you, the presence of generalized searches causes everyone to feel that they're suspected, and that only decreases your alienation with the environment, furthers mistrust, and links directly into criminalization, doesn't impact on the safety of the environment. Furthermore, Johnson tells you how stop and frisk has a direct impact upon students' risk of delinquency, namely by 4 times. That links directly into all their impacts regarding safety.
So they go for trust in their final focus, but the problem is they never address them across the analysis, which says that only 7% of trust is actually caused by the assertiveness of discipline. That was a really big defense that they never respond to. It's like really not a big impact. The most important impact is lives. In drugs is going to be the biggest link in the lives. Because we say 30,000 people will die from marijuana every single year, and suicide goes up 7-fold. Through marijuana specifically, marijuana is the main impact in the round. So let's go on drug testing, our second addiction. There's a few problems. First, Yamaguchi definitely says it's not causal. He literally says, quote, we cannot conclude a causal relationship. And he also literally says that the reason that the schools with drug testing had more drugs is because they had a drug problem in the first place. Like he literally says that you should call for the indict because he literally indicts himself in a later study. At that point, and that is their National Institute for Drug Abuse study. It's done by Yamaguchi because it has the same sample size. It's done by the same researchers. So then they say that the cost is really high, right? That's one of the responses they go for. But their evidence doesn't say that, right? It doesn't say that they're actually diverting money from the therapy into the drug testing. It just says that it takes resources that could have been used for the therapy programs or education programs, right? So it doesn't prove there's an actual trade-off, and that way if we eliminate your drug testing, you would go back into these education programs. But moreover, they never responded to more important analysis which says if you test positive on a drug test, that's how you go to the therapy program and how you see lower drug use, right? That's the entire warrant to our case. We give several pieces of evidence saying that it's when you test positive, then you go into the drug testing programs. It's how you target those students, right? But then their last response was that it increases the use of harder drugs. But first of all, that response wasn't in summary, but also Sam makes the analysis the kids don't know what's on the drug test, meaning they're not going to switch to synthetic drugs. But more importantly, they never proved that these synthetic drugs are actually worse than marijuana, right? And we're saying marijuana is way worse because it kills 30,000 people every single year. They don't do the comparative analysis there, right? So marijuana is the biggest impact around because it links to the lives the best. And because ultimately, whenever you're sent to the treatment programs and you're targeted specifically with the drug testing programs that are eliminated under the probable cause standard, that's the biggest link to the lives and why you should be voting for the negative. Thank you.